Good. So on the basis of yesterday's talk, frantically threw another one together last night because it wasn't really appropriate for what I wanted to say in the light of what everybody else had said much better than I did. So it's going to be a game of two halves, awarding gaps for all, reducing awarding gaps for all, hopefully a little bit of that, but then something more purposeful, a resource, a tool that we might use across the sector to engage in this politically fraught area of diversifying and decolonizing the curriculum. So I'm very conscious that I'm a white, middle class now male. My background was working class, but in my defense, in my current practice, I'm a trade union activist, so I've stood on the picket line recently for the UCU 4 fights, and one of those fights is about equality, gender pay equality, racial pay equality, and disabled members of staff pay equality. And this animates my students a lot. So when I say to my students on the picket line, and I give them the pamphlet, I say, put all that intersectionality in one person. So if you had an ethnic minority, female, disabled member of staff, they would get paid on average half what I get paid. And that really animates my students. So one of the 4 pillars of the culturally sustainable curriculum we heard about yesterday was about challenging power. Some of us might be more emboldened to challenge power within our context here of diversifying and decolonizing the curriculum for the sake of our students. But what goes for the students goes for the staff, I think. Anyway, so my colleague there, Neil Williams, has got together some of the data I'm going to talk about. And Harry Chan, John Peter there was a student who worked with me on the second half of this talk. So this is a typical Kingston student population. I recognize one white face in the front there. He was one of my students. These aren't my students, just one of them is represented there. But in my pharmacology class, if I had 100 students, 99% of them would be non-white students. So we have an amazingly diverse community of students in some parts of our university at Kingston University. So who are they, these people? And what do they bring? What do they come with? So we're very fortunate at Kingston to have very analytical tools of data analysis to look at the achievement and progress of our students. So every module leader and every course leader has access to a very extensive dashboard of data. So this is my course, pharmaceutical science, or one of my courses, pharmaceutical science. And this tells you something about the demographics of my students in terms of ethnicity, age on entry, IMD quintile, commuter students. And you can put in any demographic. There's a little drop-down menu there. You could put down lots of demographic characteristics of the students and they pop up. So I put this one up because I'm very interested to see, and I didn't know this before I put my course evaluation plan together a couple of months ago. My students are economically deprived, so that index of multiple deprivation, the IMD, most of my students fall in the second category. You see there, 36.6% of my students are in the second quintile of the IMD. And now that is index of multiple deprivation. So that is income, employment, education, health, crime, barriers to housing and services, and living environment. So I live in my comfortable white middle class environment. My students are bringing this kind of personal characteristics into my teaching space. How do I relate to those individuals, those very diverse individuals who live completely different lives to me? So largely I've found the best way to do that is to remove myself from the teaching context and let the students speak for themselves. And hopefully we can come to some of that now. So this kind of data is very important. It isn't granular enough, frankly, because we still deal with very objectionable, I think, chunks of people, chunks of humanity, and we group together people really inappropriately, as we'll see from some of this data. So I'm trying to fight the fight of getting more granular data, because when I ask students to self-represent, I get a kaleidoscopic avalanche of answers, not just 4 or 5 very rough groupings of students. Let's have a look at the problems the students bring. So some of this data looks horrendous. So pre-COVID, we removed lots of the awarding gaps. just look at the trends. You don't need to look at the granular data. So this is for students who have, my glasses off, BTEC. They come with BTEC. And many of our BTEC students, we complain about they don't progress very well in our system. But we managed pre-COVID to get the BTEC students to progress just as well as, and sometimes better than, our A-level students. Kingston has a very nice way of analyzing the gaps, and that's the data here. So this gives you a pictorial representation of the gaps between BTEC students, A-level students, and other kinds of students in this particular analysis. So you can see we did a pretty good job with the BTEC students pre-COVID. Post-COVID, things have taken a bit of a decline, but hopefully some of the things I'll talk about will seek to address that decline. So we were doing things before COVID, which was successful with our very diverse population of students. No matter where they came from, all of that multiplicity of characteristics we seem to be catering for. Here is data on, this is very small, commuter students, and Nigel talked very eloquently about commuter students yesterday. And we can see we were doing a pretty good job with our commuter students. That orange one there, they were doing just as well as the non-commuting students. There's the gap data. So we're doing pretty well until COVID came along. The plummeting graphs on the side here, that's an anomaly. That's 2023 data. I don't know why the dashboard includes that. So 2023 data, forget that, declined to 0. So we're interested in these characteristics here, 2021, 22, and we can see we're doing a pretty good job with our commuting students pre-COVID. And this data is for ethnicity. And there was a stage, so this blue line is Black students. And we can see that our Black students were outperforming the other students in some years. Post-COVID, when we're going back to face-to-face exams and assessments, that performance has declined. Here's the gap data. There was no gaps here during the COVID period and pre-COVID, but post-COVID, our performance has declined again. So what I'm particularly not happy with is this other category, other mixed. Who are these people? Are they Yemenis? Are they Algerians? Are they Iranians? Are they Afghanis, Syrians? What are they? What kind of people are they? But because they're doing particularly badly. So there's small numbers of students maybe here, but they've got a gap apparently last year of -60. So that, I don't know who those students are though. So if I have a criticism of the very granular data that we have at Kingston, it is not granular enough, not by a long way. So that -60 there, the last number on the right, that is there a pointer on this? Let me have that. Yeah, there, -60, that is pretty bad, whoever these students are post-COVID. But we were doing a pretty good job. There's the blue lines there. Not working for some reason on the screen, it's working on my hand. Weird. The blue lines in the middle bottom panel show that the Black students on occasion outperform other students. And that's exactly the kind of data we want. It's the kind of data we were getting consistently on this course pre-COVID, and that's what we want to aim for post-COVID. So every course leader at Kingston gets this kind of data, and every module leader at the module level can get that kind of data. Lots of pull-down charts, and you can hover over the data, and it'll give you the numbers and the stats for every characteristic you can think of. So, armed with this kind of information, the things we did to bridge the awarding gap pre-COVID were things like academic peer mentoring, which addresses the progression problem that I showed in one of the first slides. So some of my students from level 4, year 1, level 5, year 2, they don't progress very well. So what could we do about that? And then there's the problem identified by Jason yesterday about the broken pipeline. So Black researchers, if you don't have students doing well at the undergraduate level in their projects, then they don't go on to do PhDs, and then they don't go on to become members of the academic community. And students, as we heard yesterday, relate much better to ethnic minority members of staff than they do to white members of staff in a diverse learning environment. So how do we address that broken pipeline problem? And a summer research internship program seems to address some of that. So let's have a look at that data. So this is data from my own course of the academic peer mentoring scheme. So this is rather old data, but the scheme is running very successfully. We were one of the first courses to run that program. Here, second year students get paid in timetabled sessions to tutor first year students. Timetabled activities is crucial because, as Nigel pointed out, lots of our students commute huge distances. If it's not timetabled, they won't attend. So we put it into their timetables. The second year students get paid. It benefits them. The first year students go along to those timetabled sessions around assessment points. So we timetable them to correspond to assessment points, and the second year students tutor the first years. And you can see on the left side all of those characteristics there. In the middle, the non-engaged students and the percentage who passed, so 70, 50%, 75%. Then on the right, the students who engage in that process, and virtually all those numbers are 100. So these are first year students. That transition into higher education is difficult, particularly difficult for my students with their complexity of different backgrounds. They may speak English as a second, third, or fourth language even. They're often first in their family to university. But if they engage in this process, look at all those hundreds on the right side. And some of those students are commuting students. Some of them come in with low entry tariffs. So the students who engage on average have lower entry qualifications than the students who don't engage. But nevertheless, if they engage, they do much better than those ostensibly better qualified students. This scheme only seems to work, funnily enough, for quantitative disciplines in our university. So for humanity disciplines, the percentage increase is not so good. My course, that's the best metric across the university that I can think of. The next best is maths, I think, and there's about 16% uplift for their students. So for some reason, especially in quantitative disciplines like ours, that kind of tutoring scheme seems to reap massive benefits for students. So these are the kind of things we were doing pre-COVID to bridge the awarding gaps between our white students and students from ethnic minorities. And we did that pretty successfully pre-COVID. But as you've seen, post-COVID, the data is a lot more patchy, and we are trying to recover some of that situation. So this is another historical data set really about how we can improve access to research opportunities for ethnic minority students. So it was our experience when we first ran this scheme that ethnic minority students were just as keen to apply for summer research internships as other students, but were terribly unsuccessful in getting their foot in the door. So again, it's a paid opportunity over about 8 weeks of summer, about £150 a week. Students had to apply with a CV and a cover letter. I had an interview with somebody who ran a lab. Ethnic minority students did very badly in that application process. So we just nuanced it very slightly, just changed the language, made it a bit more accommodating, explained the scheme a bit more fully to the applicants. Because there's lots of data to suggest that that broken pipeline can be fixed quite easily by this kind of scheme, and there are massive benefits both in the North American context, as you can see there, and from the UK context. So after we put in those very, very subtle, nuanced modifications into the application process, the ethnic minority on the left application success rate went up. The white application rate stayed roughly the same. So we have now more underrepresented students doing summer research studentships. And that's important because students who do that summer research experience get an uplift in terms of their outcomes of good degrees, the first and the 2-1. So on average, students who engage in that program do better than students who have applied. So they're the worried well as well, but they haven't had that research opportunity. Students who have the research opportunity on average do much better. The white students also do better, but not statistically significantly so. And this is the important point of my talk about bridging awarding gaps for all. But ethnic minority students, as you can see on the right there, there's a massive uplift. They undertake the research program, they invariably are massively more likely to get a first or a 2-1. Now, these kind of schemes within our context are funded by the OFS, and the fund is the Access and Participation Plan Fund. That money is not targeted to ethnic minorities specifically. It's targeted to a whole range of underrepresented students within our communities: caregivers, care leavers, refugees, immigrants, people from army families, Gypsy and Roma. And these are the kind of people we never think about in these kind of decolonizing, diversifying terms and bridging the awarding gaps terms. We invariably think about ethnic minority students. And I think that's quite an awkward place for us to be, actually. So with this OFS money, I think the things we've done at Kingston benefit all students, but benefit the targeted recipients, the intended targets, the ethnic minority students, the bridging the awarding gap students. They are elevated in terms of attainment, but so is everybody else in some way. And I think that is the most equitable thing that we can do, because it would be very invidious if in these slides I showed a massive uplift for the ethnic minority students and then a massive decrease for the white students. That's just not on, I don't think, in terms of equity, because some of those white students might be those OFS targeted students, the Roma, the care leavers, the caregivers, the disabled, the ones the money is intended for. So I was hastily cobbling this together last night. So the first part of the talk is the label on the tin, isn't it? All bridging all awarding gaps. And now it's about a resource, a tool that we can use, because I was very struck yesterday about conversations about how awkward people felt about entering into this politically fraught and contested milieu. So Lena Grinstead told us yesterday that 41% of the academics she surveyed said they needed training and support. 20% of them said they didn't want anything to do with this kind of nonsense. It was just rubbish. It was nothing to do with their academic practice. It was something they didn't want to get involved with. 20%. And that's the ones who do the socially favorable answering, right? So that was a question I asked her. How many people are just ticking the socially acceptable box by saying they are engaged in it? 20% of them were brave enough to say it's just rubbish, I'm not getting involved in it. I fear it's a lot more than that. So there's a need out there, I think, for colleagues to be able to have the tools to be able to do something meaningful with their students and protect themselves, because it is a very politically sensitive and contested area. The government wants us to get rid of racial equality charters and Athena Swan. The government is philosophically opposed to the things we're doing here today. So it is a charged environment. And standing on the picket line, that is, you really feel that. You really feel that. Handing out pamphlets about inequity in higher education, that's the sharp end of the inequity debates within our society. So Lena said about the staff being reluctant to engage because they're fearful and they haven't got the training support. Amanol Schuster said about reading lists. Well, what reading lists can we use? I think Carl's got something about reading lists as well. So I've tried to think of not what we're doing for the students, but what the students can bring. Because I'm like this, my students look at me in bafflement, just like you are now. Who's this bold bloke chatting rubbish at me? So it's much better for them to be represented much more prominently within the classroom setting, I think. So why is my curriculum white? And the bog standard answer from a quantitative bioscience academic is well, objective facts, right? How can I teach, how can I teach the Lineweaver-Burke plot in a colonized way? Is it, 2 and 2 is 4, whatever color you are, right? That's the bog standard defensive response from a quantitative scientist. That removes from the equation completely the very diverse students in front of them. So you may come from this white privilege background and you're chatting your spiel. The students in front of you, that is a literal foreign language for many of them. Science is a foreign language for them, which needs to be translated and contextualized. And we may not be the best people to do that. So how can we do it? How can we? So they got don't diversify, decolonize. And I was very heartened to be sat on this table with Jason yesterday where he said these things are virtually interchangeable. So we have to think about the colonizing aspect. What is it that we're delivering which needs changing? Before you change it, you have to situate yourself in the problem. what is the problem? What is the colonization of my material that I'm delivering to this diverse student body? So I think that don't diversify, decolonize, that's a bit of a red herring, as Jason pointed out yesterday. We have to understand our traditional viewpoints, where we're coming from, our background, that accretion of Eurocentric knowledge that we're delivering to our non-Eurocentric audiences. So when I think about it a bit more deeply, I think what I do is actually diversify and not decolonize. But I'm going to be wrong, I'm going to be big-footed, I'm going to be insensitive culturally and, personally. So I'm going to try and remove myself from this context and get the students to do the stuff, because they're the ones who are being affected by what we're doing. So let's use the student voice. So got Harry Chan to do a quick and dirty survey of the student body. Did they see themselves represented in the curriculum? Do they think the university has got their interests at heart and is conscious of these debates? What do the students think that we need to do? And this is the quick and dirty analysis that Harry Chan, John Peter did. He's used interchangeably, I note now, diversify the curriculum and decolonize the curriculum. So I don't think students understand the difference either. So this is just a semantic conversation, right? We just need to change our practice for the benefit of our students, whether it's diversifying or decolonizing. If we, and Jason, the expert in this area, can't really split out semantically what decolonization and diversifying is in our practice, then I don't think we need to worry so much about the words. We just need to worry about what we're doing for the people in front of us. And if we're generous and kind to the people in front of us, I think they'll forgive us our preconceptions, our backgrounds, and any mistakes that we make in that environment. But anyway, 90% of the students said, you've got to do something, do something. It's urgent, right? Urgent. Okay, let's do something. So my very first foray into this area was to get Harry Chan, John Peter, who was from Sri Lanka, by the way. So he's of Sri Lankan descent. And he had the very good idea of using the colors of the Sri Lankan flag to represent a scientist from his own community. And Harry Chan, John Peter, turned out to be a fantastic artist. So this is a pharmaceutical scientist, and pharmaceutical science is a mixture of biology and chemistry. And this student just naively signed up to my project, an undergraduate research project running over two semesters. And I didn't know he was going to be a good artist. He turned out to be a great artist. Who knew? Who knew? So the creativity and skills of our students, it's a really huge untapped resource. And it's only by doing this kind of thing, which comes from Dave Lewis's capstone project program. This is like an infographic. Dave mentions these all the time. It's an infographic project, case study based project. And Harry Chan has found somebody from his own environment and has represented that beautiful picture there and got the nuance of putting the colors of the Sri Lankan flag into the data. This is an image obtained with a Creative Commons license. So I'm just flagging that up because that's a potential hazard for us entering into this area. So I'm trying to harness the creativity, the artistic creativity of my students to give us a resource about underrepresented scientists that we can use more widely in our contexts. So I need data, don't I? I need to get underrepresented scientists wedged into that final year project program. So what do? So everybody, I guess, in a room has done that very primitive academic skills task with their students of, we want to do a literature search, and then you find the literature, and I want you to appropriately reference it in Harvard or Vancouver style. That's a bog standard year one task for students in an academic skills type environment, referencing and literature searching. So I did that basic workshop, and then I nuanced it by asking students to then, once they found a piece of information, so something that interests them in the metro headline, they're on the tube, they're commuting like Nigel tells us for hours. So they're reading the metro or they're looking at their phones on the tube. Something catches their eye, like caffeine cures cancer, or sunlight is going to give you skin melanoma, whatever. A newspaper headline, which then they can chase up and find the original primary literature underneath and reference it appropriately. So that's the standard task. Then I extend that task by asking them to find somebody who reflects them as an individual who has done the same work. So then they go off again to do that task. So not to exclude anybody, because there are some white students in my class. It's not about what country of origin your parents came from, where your genes are from. It's not what religion you are. It's what town do you come from, who shares your name. So nobody is excluded. So bridging awarding gaps for all, not just invidiously picking on individuals in the group to benefit them to the exclusion of others. So this is kind of a non-exclusionary way of getting everybody to find themselves within the curriculum. So we're looking at texts which reflect individuals, every individual in the class. And by this way, we're generating a database of underrepresented scientists from across the world who have contributed to the canon of literature. And somebody mentioned that Shane Austin said, we need to create capital in our students. And they need to be shown representation of marginalized scientists. And I think this task does that. Yusra also said, we tend to exclusively use Western scientists as sources of information for our students in terms of literature. And I think this gets around that. Okay, that way. Okay, so how we're going to advance it. So students then take the data from the first year students, and those undergraduate final year students can be creative themselves. I'm enlisting the fine arts students in my university so we can churn out a lot of material. So I've got to draw up a pitch. Apparently the artists say, you've got to do a pitch, Nick. So I've got to do a pitch, whatever that is, and students are going to bid for it. And we can then kind of generate lots more creative images of underrepresented scientists. That's to you who discovered artemisinin, an anti-malarial drug. We saw Alice Augustus Ball in an image earlier today. She's a bog standard pharmaceutical scientist from the University of Hawaii, the first Black representative from the University of Hawaii to be an academic. And she dealt with leprosy. So these are relevant case studies for my students to work with. Harry Chan, John Peter drew these as well. But you can see the one on the left is a drawing from the cover of Time magazine by somebody called Bijou Carmen. I've been in touch with her to ask her whether I can publish that drawing from Harry Chan. No reply yet. So I don't know if I can use it. The one on the right is under US law in the public domain because it's published before 1927. We're not in the States. I don't know if I can use that either. So the copyright issue is quite live, but I'm chasing everybody up to find out if I can use them. So here's some student comments. I'll let you read those in 2 minutes. Tick tock, tick tock, tick tock. Read them fast, read them fast, read them fast. Yeah. Yeah. I like that last one. Hard work and diligence can pay off someday. I like that. That's a first year student talking. Oh, we've cracked it already. Hard work and diligence. That's all I ask. Hard work and diligence. Yeah. I've nearly finished. So the ultimate aim is to produce a resource for everybody to use. And my idea is not original. Somebody did this one, Women in Science. That was a New York Times bestseller. A New York Times bestseller. But if you look at the cartoons, I think they're rubbish. I think Harry Chan, John Peter, my pharmaceutical science student, did a much better job. I think those characters are primitive, aren't they? They're just not very good. That's a New York Times bestseller, so I think it's a bit of a runner. Prachi said, "You can't be what you don't see." So my students are seeing themselves in the literature. They're drawing out those scientists. They're representing them in a creative way as pictures. And hopefully we'll have that resource available for the wider community. Somebody in King's is doing something very similar with pharmacologists. So I'm going to be working with him and his students soon too. So I think just accidentally, I've hit some of the 4 pillars of culturally sensitive curricula scales that Yusra was talking about from Thomas and Quinlan. So I think diversity is represented in those cards. I think definitely they're positive portrayals. And I want to talk about the classroom interaction. That is the liveliest session I do, because now it's a game. It's a treasure hunt. They're desperately trying to find people who represent themselves. That girl from Eritrea, how would you find an Eritrean scientist? They're hunting through the literature. They're competing against each other. The student from St. Lucia couldn't find anybody from St. Lucia who contributed to the canon in pharmaceutical science or biology or chemistry, so had to go off-piste. I think she ended up with somebody from Barbados. But then it's really engaged, lively session. So inclusive classroom interactions. I'm not sure about the challenge in the power. I'm doing that on the picket line, handing out the leaflets. I'm challenging the power, trying to get my students to challenge the power too. They're very animated by these discussions. I tell them to email the Vice Chancellor to challenge the power. I give them his name. I don't know how many of them do, but hopefully they do. These examples are just a few of the schemes we run at Kingston. There's others, the Kingston Award, Beyond Barriers Mentoring, Student Ambassador, lots of these are paid, Navigate workshops, and Elevate, designed to empower and support Black home-based students only, equipment, commercial awareness and skills needed to complete in the job market. So there's lots of these kind of things going on at Kingston. We've seen a post-COVID dip in attainment, and the awarding gap is back with us, but hopefully the things we've done historically to target that and the new things that we're developing will bring us back on the side of the angels. And I want to finish with a quote from Jason. Why are the notions of absolute truth so fixed? So I've used my students to unfix those absolute truths by finding case studies, scientists from underrepresented communities who have contributed to the canon in an easy, fun way, so that colleagues who are a bit tentative about entering into this environment can have an easy way into those conversations. I'd like to finish there.